Worry always enters the heart disguised as a helper. It whispers that if only we replay events in our minds, if only we tighten our grip on every possible outcome, then we will be prepared, then we will be safe. It arrives like a friend offering protection, but it stays as a master who enslaves. And once it takes the throne of our thoughts, it rules with cruelty. It demands endless attention yet provides no reward. It feeds on our strength and in exchange gives us nothing but fear. That is why it is a false master, loud, commanding, and relentless, yet entirely powerless to change reality. Think of the hours, perhaps even years, that slip through our hands because of it. Nights spent staring into the dark, rehearsing what might go wrong tomorrow. Days consumed with endless what-ifs that grow heavier with every thought. In the moment, we believe such rehearsals prepare us. But when tomorrow comes, do we feel stronger because of them? No, we feel weaker, for worry has already drained the strength we needed to face the day. It is like paying interest on a debt we may never owe. The tragedy is that many carry such debts all their lives and never realize they were imaginary. Worry makes itself sound reasonable. It tells us that vigilance is wise, that carefulness is virtue, and that preparation is necessary. And in truth, vigilance and carefulness and preparation do have their place. But the difference is this: preparation acts while worry merely circles. Preparation builds while worry destroys. Preparation is rooted in trust that we can do our part faithfully. Worry, however, is rooted in the belief that no part is ever enough, that something terrible will always slip through the cracks. And so worry spins us endlessly in its wheel, promising progress but producing only exhaustion. Let us consider how much of our anxiety is directed toward things that never arrive. How often do we sit trembling at the thought of disasters that never come? How often do we suffer twice, once in imagination and once, perhaps, in reality? A wise man once observed that he had suffered many troubles, most of which never happened. That is the mark of worry. It multiplies shadows and convinces us they are storms. It fills the corners of our mind with dangers that may never exist, yet they wound us as though they already had. And if worry is a master, then it is one that takes more than it gives. It takes our joy, for we cannot celebrate the moment if we are always fearing its end. It takes our relationships, for when our hearts are anxious, we are too distracted to be fully present with those we love. It takes our clarity, for worry is like smoke in the mind, clouding judgment and making it harder to see truth. Above all, it takes our trust, convincing us that the only way to survive is to keep control clenched tightly in our fists. And yet control, as every honest heart knows, is an illusion. We are not the masters of tomorrow. The sooner we see this, the sooner we are free. Some may object. If I do not worry, am I not careless? But to abandon worry is not to abandon wisdom. One can be careful without being consumed, thoughtful without being tormented. The difference lies in whether we live from fear or from trust. Fear insists that disaster is always around the corner, that we must constantly guard ourselves or perish. Trust, however, knows that even when difficulties arise, they are not the end of the story. Trust allows us to prepare with calmness, while fear only drives us into frenzy. Worry is a poor master because it demands everything but provides nothing. It enslaves us to imaginary chains and convinces us they are real. Yet the key to freedom lies within reach, the simple act of refusing to bow. When we feel its grip, we must ask ourselves, what has worry ever accomplished for me? Has it healed? Has it restored? Has it guided? The answer is always silence. For worry is not a leader, it is a tyrant. It cannot carry us forward, it can only hold us back. There comes a point when the heart must choose whom it will serve. Will it serve worry, endlessly restless and never satisfied? Or will it choose trust, quiet and steady, pointing us toward a greater strength than our own? The choice may seem small, but it changes everything. To stop worrying is to dethrone the false master and to place our lives back in the care of the one who truly leads. That is why worry must never be welcomed as a friend. It is an impostor, pretending to shield us but secretly enslaving us. And until we see it for what it is, we cannot walk in freedom. Once we do, however, the chains fall away and we begin to taste a lighter, truer way of living, one not ruled by fear, but by trust. Trust is often spoken of as though it were simple, as though it were nothing more than a gentle feeling or a pleasant hope that things will work out. But real trust is far more demanding. It is not a mere thought, it is an act of surrender. To trust is to yield, to unclench the fists that grip the steering wheel of life, and to say, I am not the one who must direct every turn. And this yielding is no small task, for surrender goes against the instinct of our nature. We long for control because control makes us feel safe. Yet control is the very thing we must release if we are ever to know true peace. Consider how often we say we trust, yet cling to our own designs. We pray for guidance, then rush forward with our own answers before waiting to hear them. We say we believe the way will be shown, but we demand it be shown according to our timeline, our logic, our expectation. This is not trust, it is negotiation. It is saying, I will hand over my life, but only if it is led where I already wanted to go. Such a posture is still self at the center, still control dressed in softer words. True trust asks for something deeper. It asks us to let go even when we cannot see where the road leads. It asks us to release outcomes, not just the process. It asks us to admit that our wisdom, no matter how clever or experienced, is still limited. And so we surrender, not because we have lost, but because we have recognized that winning was never in our hands to begin with. Surrender is frightening because it feels like weakness. Our pride resists it. We think, if I do not plan every detail, if I do not hold everything together, surely it will all collapse. But think back to moments when life took turns you did not expect. Were there not times when the very doors you tried to keep shut needed to open? Were there not times when what you thought was a loss became the seed of a greater gift? The truth is that our vision is too small to see the whole picture. What feels like defeat may be the foundation of future strength. What looks like D2 may be the true road. But to see this, we must first surrender our right to be the master of outcomes. This does not mean surrendering responsibility. We are still called to act, to choose, to labor, and to build. But it does mean surrendering the final word. It means living in obedience rather than in stubbornness. It means saying, I will do what I can faithfully, but the fruit is not mine to command. That is where freedom begins, when we cease trying to be both worker and master, and accept that our role is to follow, not to dictate. When surrender takes root, trust becomes more than an idea, it becomes a posture of life. Anxiety loosens, for we are no longer enslaved by the endless need to control. Fear diminishes, for we realize that even if our plans fail, we are still being guided. Pride melts, for we see that our cleverness was never the foundation of our safety. And in the place of these burdens, peace quietly rises. Think of the sailor on a vast sea. He cannot command the wind, nor can he dictate the tides. If he tries, he will break himself against forces far greater than he is. But if he learns to surrender to those forces, to set his sails to the wind, to trust the current, then the very powers that seemed overwhelming will carry him forward. He is not passive. He must still steer, adjust, and labor. But his strength comes from surrendering to what is beyond him, not from resisting it. So it is with trust. The surrender we fear is not the end of our strength, but the beginning of it. And here lies the paradox: only when we surrender do we discover that we are not falling, but being held. What we thought was weakness becomes strength, and what we thought was defeat becomes freedom. The clenched fist cannot receive, but the open hand can. And the one who surrenders learns that guidance flows more surely to the heart that yields than to the one that resists. This is why trust cannot exist without surrender. To claim trust while still demanding our own way is to speak words without substance. Real trust is proven not in calm waters but in scorns, when visibility is gone, when certainty has vanished, and yet the soul says, I will not fear. I will yield, for I know I am not alone. And in that moment, trust becomes alive, and surrender becomes the doorway to peace. There is a mystery that surrounds the journey of life. We like to imagine that the path is entirely of our own choosing, that the roads we walk are only the result of our decisions and efforts. Yet if we pause and look back, how many times do we find ourselves surprised by where we have arrived? How often do we see that the path was not one we planned, and yet it carried us to places we needed to be? It is as though an unseen hand was quietly at work, guiding each step, arranging moments, weaving together encounters that we could never have orchestrated on our own. This unseen hand does not always make itself known in grand gestures. More often it appears in the quiet timing of events, in the chance meeting that changes everything, in the door that closed just when we thought it should open. At first, we resist these interruptions. We grumble at delays, despair at disappointments, or feel lost when our maps fail us. But later, often much later, we look back and see that what once felt like missteps were actually part of a larger design. The detours were not wasted, they were necessary turns that shaped our story. We may ask, why is the guidance hidden? Why not make the way clear from the beginning so we could walk without confusion or fear? Perhaps because if the path were always lit in full, we would not learn to walk by trust. We would lean only on sight, only on certainty, and our hearts would never be trained in dependence. It is in the unseen guidance that our faith grows. The unseen hand is not less real because it is hidden, rather, its hiddenness invites us into deeper trust. Imagine a child walking with a parent through a crowded street. The child does not know the way. The turns are confusing, the path unfamiliar, and the crowd overwhelming. Yet the child does not panic, for the parent's hand is steady in his own. The child does not need to know every turn, only that the hand will not let go. In the same way, our lives are filled with unknowns, but the presence of guidance makes the unknown bearable. We are not left to stumble in the dark. Though we may not always see the hand that leads us, we can feel tug forward, its steadying strength when we falter. And here is a humbling truth: sometimes the guidance comes through our failures. We think we are lost when plans crumble, yet the collapse itself redirects us to a truer way. We think we are abandoned when prayers seem unanswered, yet the silence itself reshapes our desires until they align with something greater. The unseen hand is not only present in our triumphs, but also in our losses, working quietly to turn even ashes into something meaningful. This does not mean the road will be smooth. Guidance does not erase struggle, it redeems it. The unseen hand may lead us into valleys as well as mountaintops, through nights as well as mornings, but always with purpose, always with the assurance that no step is wasted. Even the steps that feel most uncertain, most painful, are part of a design we cannot yet see. When we accept this, the burden of worry begins to lift. We no longer need to demand a clear map, for we trust that a guide walks with us. We no longer need to despair when doors close, for we trust that other doors will open in their time. We no longer need to feel lost when the road twists, for we trust that the unseen hand is shaping the journey with more wisdom than we possess. To let this truth sink in is to walk with lighter steps. It is to live not with frantic grasping, but with quiet confidence. It is to rise each morning and say, I may not know where today will take me, but I know I am not walking it alone. And that knowledge transforms even the most ordinary day into a sacred journey, for every step, seen or unseen, is being guided. And one day, when we look back, we will see what we could not see while walking. We will see how the scattered moments of confusion formed a pattern, how the setbacks made way for new beginnings, how the very things that once filled us with fear were the stepping stones that carried us forward. Then we will understand more fully that the unseen hand was there all along, steady, faithful, and sure. Peace is something the human heart longs for more than almost anything else. We chase it in our careers, hoping that if we can just reach a certain level of success, rest will finally come. We seek it in relationships, imagining that if we are surrounded by enough love and approval, our anxieties will disappear. We look for it in possessions, believing that if we own enough, we will feel secure. Yet peace always slips through our fingers when we try to seize it in these ways. The reason is simple: true peace is not the fruit of control or accumulation. It is the fruit of trust. Trust and peace are bound together in a way that cannot be separated. When we try to carry our burdens alone, the heart is restless. When we clutch the reins of our lives, constantly worrying about where the road will turn, peace is impossible. Peace does not live in clenched hands or anxious hearts. It lives in open hands, in surrendered hearts, in the quiet confidence that we are being led by wisdom greater than our own. Think of a traveler lost in the wilderness, holding a broken compass. He tries to orient himself, studies the sun, guesses at the path, but his uncertainty gnaws at him. Every step feels dangerous, Every sound in the forest heightens his fear. But then a guide appears, someone who knows the land, who has walked it many times. The traveler is still in the same wilderness, still surrounded by unknowns. Yet now, because he trusts the guide, his heart begins to rest. The forest has not changed, but his peace has returned. Why? Because peace is not about the absence of danger, but about the presence of trust. So often, we believe peace will come only when life finally aligns with our desires, when problems vanish, when all storms cease. But peace is not found in waiting for storms to end. It is found in learning to trust while the storm still rages. When trust takes root, peace becomes possible even in the fiercest winds. For the heart that trusts does not depend on calm seas to rest. It depends on the assurance that the one steering the ship knows what he is doing. It is easy to confuse peace with numbness or denial. Some imagine peace means ignoring difficulties or pretending everything is fine. But peace is not blind. It does not deny reality. Rather, it looks at reality with clear eyes and still chooses rest because it knows that reality is not the final word. Peace says, yes, the storm is real. Yes, the valley is deep. But I am not abandoned. Therefore, I will not be consumed by fear. That is a deeper peace than any denial could offer. Notice also how peace changes the way we face life. The anxious person is constantly distracted, unable to be present in the moment. Worry about tomorrow robs them of today. But the person who trusts can enjoy what is before them, because their heart is not enslaved to the future. They can love more deeply, listen more fully, work more diligently, because their energy is not devoured by restless fear. Peace does not make life easier, but it makes us more alive within it. This peace is not something we can manufacture. We cannot simply will ourselves into calmness. It flows naturally when we place our trust where it belongs. It is like the quiet that follows a storm when the winds finally die down. The quiet is not forced, it is the result of change. In the same way, peace follows trust as surely as calm follows surrender. When we stop fighting to control everything, the soul breathes freely again. And here lies the wonder: peace does not wait for perfection. It comes in the middle of imperfection. It does not wait for the future to resolve every unknown. It dwells in the present, even with its loose ends, because trust makes the present livable. Peace is not about everything being settled. It is about knowing we are settled in the hands of the one who leads us. Imagine carrying a heavy burden down a long road. Every step grows harder. Your shoulders ache. Your strength fades, and you wonder if you can continue. Then someone stronger comes alongside and takes the weight from your shoulders. You are still on the same road, still walking the same distance, but suddenly the walk feels lighter, the air fresher, your heart freer. That is what peace is like. Life does not always change, but the weight we carry changes when trust takes it out of our hands. And when peace fills the heart, it becomes a shield. Fear may knock at the door, but peace answers. Anxiety may try to stir, but peace quiets it. The heart anchored in trust is not tossed about by every wave of uncertainty. It may feel the storm, but it does not lose its center. Peace, then, is not just a gift, it is a guard, and it stands watch over all who dare to trust. The world tells us that strength is shown through control. The strong person, we are told, is the one who bends circumstances to their will, who dictates the outcome, who refuses to yield. From childhood we are taught that to surrender is weakness, that to obey is to be lesser, and that power comes from mastery over life. Yet this is a lie dressed in noble clothing. True strength is not found in clinging to control, but in living with obedience. Obedience to the one who knows what we cannot see, whose wisdom reaches farther than our sight. Control seems powerful, but it is fragile. How quickly it breaks when life shifts unexpectedly. One phone call, one storm, one loss, and the illusion of control collapses. Those who build their strength on control spend their lives in fear, for they know, even if they do not admit it, that control can vanish in a moment. Their strength is like a castle of sand, impressive for a time, but always trembling under the tide. Obedience, on the other hand, is steady. It does not depend on the shifting ground of circumstances. It does not claim to know all, nor does it need to. It simply listens, trusts, and follows. The obedient heart does not demand to rule, it chooses to align itself with the true ruler. And in that alignment it becomes unshakable. for it no longer leans on its own limited power, but draws strength from the one whose power has no end. Think of a soldier in battle. If he insists on doing everything his own way, ignoring the voice of his commander, he may appear brave, but in truth he is reckless. His strength will fail him because he fights without guidance. But the soldier who obeys is stronger, not because he is without thought, but because his strength is joined to a greater plan. His obedience connects him to a wisdom beyond his own, and it is that connection that gives him victory. In the same way, our lives become stronger when we stop fighting to control every outcome and instead choose obedience to a will higher than ours. Obedience also frees us from the exhaustion of self-dependence. Those who cling to control live in constant tension, as if the entire world rests on their shoulders. Every detail must be managed, every possibility considered, every risk avoided. They are weary, not because the world is heavier for them than for others, but because they refuse to share the weight. Obedience, however, releases the burden. It says, "I will walk faithfully in what I know to do, and I will trust the rest to be led." And suddenly the impossible load becomes lighter, because it is no longer carried alone. We often misunderstand obedience as passivity, as if it means doing nothing and letting life happen to us. But obedience is not laziness, it is active listening. It requires attentiveness, humility, and courage. It means taking steps that sometimes defy our instincts, making choices that others may not understand, and trusting when clarity is still far away. Obedience does not silence our effort, it guides it. It does not remove our responsibility, it directs it. The obedient person still works, still chooses, still strives, but always under the assurance that they are walking in step with a purpose greater than themselves. And here lies the paradox: control seeks strength, but finds only weakness, while obedience appears weak but becomes strong. When we try to command life on our own, our strength is limited by our small vision. But when we yield in obedience, our strength is joined with the one who sees all things. The tree that resists every wind will snap, but the tree that bends in obedience to the storm survives and grows deeper roots. Obedience bends, and in bending it endures. This kind of strength cannot be shaken by loss, for it knows even loss is not the end. It cannot be broken by fear, for it has learned that the true measure of safety lies not in control but in guidance. It cannot be silenced by failure, for it knows that even in failure, obedience brings growth. It is a strength the world cannot understand, because it is not born of self but of surrender. To stop worrying and let God lead is, at its heart, to exchange the fragile strength of control for the unshakable strength of obedience. And when this exchange is made, life no longer feels like a battle fought alone. It becomes a journey walked with steady assurance, where even the hardest steps are carried by hands stronger than our own. There is a strange paradox at the heart of human living. The more a person tries to clutch tightly at control, the heavier life feels, and the more exhausting every step becomes. But the moment one learns to release that grip and let a greater hand guide, the weight lessens. What once felt unbearable begins to feel strangely possible. This is not because the trials vanish, but because they are now shared with one far stronger. The human heart was knelt to drag the burdens of life alone. It was designed to walk in harmony with a presence that carries the heaviest part of the load. Imagine two people carrying a massive stone. One is weak, trembling under its pressure, and the other is mighty, capable of lifting it with ease. If the weaker one insists on holding the full weight, collapse is inevitable. But if he allows the stronger to take most of the weight, suddenly he can walk forward without breaking. This is how the soul feels when it finally lets go of its self-imposed control and lets the higher power lead. The responsibilities are not erased, but they are no longer crushing. The weight of anxiety, of trying to foresee the future, of bending circumstances to one's will, begins to slip away, and in its place, peace and direction take root. Every burden feels lighter when carried by two, but especially when one of them is infinite. Many live with a hidden pride, even while drowning. They insist, "I can do this myself. I don't need help." Yet this false strength is what breaks them. There is greater courage in admitting weakness than in pretending strength. For when you confess your frailty, you open the door for strength beyond your own to enter. This humility transforms the unbearable into the manageable, the impossible into the possible. Life's heaviest burdens often are not physical at all. They are the invisible weights of regret, guilt, fear, and uncertainty. These are the stones that grind against the soul, slowing every step. No human invention can remove them completely, but when surrendered upward, they are carried by a force that not only relieves the load but redeems it. What was once a stone of despair can be reshaped into a stepping stone of growth. What once was a chain of fear can become a lesson in courage. Think of a traveler climbing a steep mountain. Alone, he struggles under a backpack filled with unnecessary supplies, stumbling under the strain. But when he trusts a guide who knows the terrain, the guide takes much of his load, leaving him freer to climb. The journey does not cease to be steep, but the traveler's steps grow lighter, his breathing easier, his vision clearer. He now has strength to notice the beauty around him instead of being consumed by survival. That is what happens when one allows divine leadership to carry the unnecessary weight of worry. Life does not magically lose its challenges, but it becomes bearable and even meaningful. The world tries to convince us that strength lies in self-reliance, but this is a shallow imitation of true strength. Real strength is not the stubborn refusal to lean on anyone. It is the humility to recognize that you are finite and that the infinite is waiting to walk with you. Real strength is not in boasting, "I can handle this," but in whispering, "Lead me." And when that whisper is made sincerely, burdens that once felt like shackles begin to fall away. It is in this act of letting oneself be led that the human spirit discovers its true lightness. The anxieties of tomorrow do not disappear, but they no longer strangle today. The shadows of uncertainty remain, but they are softened by trust. The troubles of life are not denied, but they are transformed into pathways of growth rather than prisons of despair. A person who learns to live this way no longer staggers under life's weight, but walks with a quiet confidence, knowing the heaviest part is no longer theirs to bear. When the soul finally accepts guidance from above, life itself begins to shift in ways that words struggle to capture. What once felt like chaos begins to show a hidden order. What once seemed meaningless takes on the texture of purpose. The days may still bring storms, but now they are not wasted, for even the storms carry lessons, shaping the heart to be steadier, kinder, wiser. To let life be led is to discover that every step, whether on mountain heights or shadowed valleys, is part of a story much larger than your own. Think of a river that has flowed for centuries, winding through hills and plains, nourishing villages, carving valleys, carrying ships. The water never chooses its course. It trusts the pull that guides it to the sea. The river is not less free for following its path, it is more itself, more alive, because it flows as it was meant to. In the same way, a person who resists divine guidance often feels trapped, fighting currents, exhausting themselves in the struggle. But when they surrender, they discover freedom. Their life begins to move with a rhythm, a direction, a flow that makes sense of their wandering. This does not mean ease. It does not mean a life free of pain. But it does mean a life filled with meaning. A person who lets themselves be led from above does not measure success by possessions, power, or fleeting applause. Instead, they measure by faithfulness, by how well they walk the path set before them. And in this shift, joy is found not in clinging but in yielding, not in controlling but in trusting. The beauty of such a life is its lightness. Burdens still come, but they are not carried alone. Worries still whisper, but they no longer command. Fears still knock, but they are no longer masters. There is a quietness in the heart that nothing in the world can counterfeit. This is the peace that surpasses understanding, the calm that comes not because the storm is gone, but because the storm has learned who guides the ship through it. And perhaps the greatest transformation is this: when one stops worrying and lets themselves be led, they become a source of hope for others. People who live this way radiate a strength that is not their own. They are calm in chaos, gentle in conflict, steady in uncertainty. And those around them are drawn to this lightness, this courage, this peace. Without even knowing it, their surrender becomes an invitation for others to find the same freedom. So the call is simple, yet profoundly difficult: stop worrying and let yourself be led. To do this is not to lose yourself, but to finally find yourself, To do this is not to abandon life, but to live it more fully. For only when guided by a hand greater than your own can you walk the path for which you were created, and only then does life become not merely survival, but a journey worth living.